Hello, this is Wes Bridle, and this is another Kingdom Calling Economic Update video. This is my second in a series of what's probably going to be 5 or 6, something like that. And all of these videos are short updates on what's going on in the economy since we've made the Coming Storm video. If you haven't seen that, you really need to. There's a link to go watch that for free. Those are the really important big picture items that you need to be aware of. These are just the facts what have been going on in the last month. So I'm going to jump right into it. Greenspan says QE2 didn't work. So that's the guy that used to be hailed as the genius that runs the world. He's not in charge anymore, so it's easy for him to say, well, it didn't work. Bernanke says he's ready to do QE3 if necessary. So the guy who is in charge of the Federal Reserve now and in many ways is the most powerful man in the world says even he's totally ready to do it work. So he's not quite admitting that it didn't work the way the former chairman is, but they don't have a lot of options. We've backed ourselves in a corner, and that's the only thing that he sees. It's a bad idea. But it comes down to the idea of, do you want immediate known for sure pain now? Or do you want to do this other thing, which if you understand economics at all, is going to cause more pain. But it won't be today. It'll be a little further down the road. And maybe, we hope, we have this theory that it might not cause pain. That's the playbook that he's running. Insider stock buys are extremely low, even though companies are buying back a lot of stocks. So the insiders of these large corporations are choosing to use a lot of the company's money to buy stock. So that looks good. They're doing a lot of stock buybacks. But if you look at what they're doing with their own personal money, it's really record levels of non-buying of their stock. So they know that they're overvalued, and we're seeing that. The stock market's crashing as I'm making these videos. Unemployment, there's just lots of bad stories. I'm not going to tell all the bad stories. There's massive, huge layoffs. There are the unemployment numbers that are coming out, a lot of bad. But Zero Hedge did an interesting study and showed that of all the past year, we've supposedly had some job gains, not recently, but over the course of the whole last year. Half of all job gains in the past year came from fudging the data through assumptions. So one of the things they do with these numbers that the government puts out is they figure, well, we can't possibly know everyone who has a job. So we're just going to assume, because the population's growing, there's probably a bunch of people out there getting jobs that we don't really know about. So we're going to factor that into these numbers. So when they put these numbers out and they show, oh, employment's up, half of the employment increases over the last year that they've been telling us about have been made up. Now, some of that is probably true. Some people, if I go and I start a little job selling lemonade on the corner, there's not a federal agency that's going to know about that. But if I'm selling lots of lemonade, I'm making money and I'm not unemployed anymore. So some of that is a real thing, but they're using a massive amount of that to create their statistics to tell us things are getting better. Even with all that they're doing, the statistics are getting much worse recently. And let's see, Hathaway had an interesting comment that the big source of job growth in the last 20 years, I think this was on King World News, was government jobs, and now those have to contract. So over the last 20 years, a big boom in the economy was the government was expanding at an incredible pace. Well, that works for a little while. The problem is, as Thatcher said, eventually you run out of other people's money. The government can only get so big because it has to be supported by the productive sector, people that actually make goods and services that other people want, not people that leech off of other people. So the government's gotten so big, so bloated, spending is out of control, and so it has to be cut back, and so now we have a problem. Well, for 20 years we've been growing with that. Now we're shrinking there, and we need the part of the economy that's been ignored to all of a sudden grow. It's a difficult position we find ourselves in. Central banks have pulled 635 tons of gold from the Bank of International Settlements in the last year. This is the most in a decade. I'm not sure how that number showed up here rather than in the my gold video, but it is an interesting point that the governments are getting less and less comfortable with other people holding their assets. They're pulling them in. Geithner admits that they don't have the ability to create a stronger recovery. If every once in a while you get a lucid moment where these politicians will admit that they really can't do anything. That's never what they promise when they're making their speeches, but occasionally they will admit, and Geithner actually came out and admitted they can't do anything to help the recovery, the economy. What they need to do is just get out and reduce the spending, reduce the taxing, reduce the regulation so that the productive people can get on with it. But that's, of course, not what we elect them to do in this country. We've come to the point where we want people to go out there and do something for us, and so all they do is really make things worse. GDP counts spending. So this is an interesting thing I hadn't thought about before. We measure whether our economy is growing or shrinking by GDP, gross domestic product. But it's based on spending, which is really a stupid way to decide whether your economy is growing or not, but that's the way that we do it. A big portion of that is based on government spending. Well, that doesn't really tell us how productive the economy is if they're just borrowing and printing lots of money for a lot of government spending. It doesn't give us a real good idea. So, but think about this. We've been doing massive amounts of that in these last couple of years, and the growth in the GDP has been really sluggish. If you take that out, then we've been extremely negative on GDP. So it should give you an idea, even with this massive amount of spending that the government is doing, we're still barely growing. China and a Chinese firm, Daegong, I think it's called, and Egan-Jones, which is a U.S. firm but not one of the big three. They're actually the most honest U.S. Credit rating agency, have both downgraded the U.S. We're probably going to see the big firms, at least one of them, do that here in the coming weeks or months. They appeared to do this quite on purpose, if you ask me. They knew about the debt ceiling. They pushed off making a deal until right before. And we saw this happen in the healthcare deal, where they didn't want anybody to be able to see the deal that they were passing. They waited till it was an emergency. I think that was the healthcare. I can't remember why that would be an emergency. But I know they passed it quickly before anyone could see it. I remember Nancy Pelosi saying, "You'll see what's in it after we pass it," or "We'll find out what's in it after we pass it." Similar thing here, where they are passing this bill at the last hour before crisis, and so then we get to find out afterwards what was in the bill. Well, they created the crisis. This has been known for a long time. They chose to wait until the last minute to pass this. It's a pretty scary way that they're operating. That leads into this super Congress thing that they're doing. I don't think I made a note about the super Congress, but they are now, I'm sure you've heard, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats making up a new super Congress, and they get to craft a bill that no one else gets to see, and then it gets voted on at the last second, and they take away a lot of Congress's normal powers. They're creating a dictatorship. It's a pretty scary thing to see the government doing. And let's see, Felix Zulauf makes an interesting point about emerging countries over the last few decades. There's been a lot of countries, Brazil's a fantastic example in the one he brought up, where 15 years ago Brazil was a basket case. They went in, they admitted their problems, they drastically reduced their debt. A lot of companies that were doing bad things had to go under, and they cleaned out the system. Today, Brazil is one of the brightest spots in the world economy. It's doing fantastically well. The government's doing well. The economy's doing well because they admitted their problems, they faced it, and they dealt with it, and they had to go through some hard times to do it. The United States and Europe right now are doing the opposite of that. They are kicking and screaming and refusing to admit that they have a problem, refusing to admit that the problem is insurmountable, and are just making things worse by the way that they're prolonging the situation, adding and adding to the debt. The debt is unpayable at this point. Catastrophe is coming. It's just, do we want it now and it's a little less, or do we extend it another month or 6 months or a year and have it be even worse? And unfortunately, they're choosing that second option. That's it. I think next I'm going to probably jump into, no, I've got one more U.S. update, so I'll be doing that here in a minute. And again, if you haven't seen The Coming Storm, video, then there's a link to watch that for free right next to this video. I recommend you do that. Thanks. God bless you.